welcome to Conscious Pathways, the podcast where we explore the intersection of education and social justice through transformative conversations. I am your host, Brittany, and welcome back for another wonderful episode of Conscious Pathways. I'm excited you're joining me. I've been seeing a few more listeners popping in, and that's been really exciting. So if this is your first time listening to Conscious Pathways, welcome. I'm happy you're here. I am joined by a wonderful advocate, teacher, documentarian, business owner. She's just a fantastic woman, an educator, an advocate for education and social justice, Karen Dr. K. Baptiste. She hails from the Bronx. She knew at a young age that she was different. Dr. K always dreamt of being an investigative journalist because she loved learning about people, culture, and the values that people hold on to. No matter the space she's in, Dr. K leads with compassionate courage and has bridged her love for supporting individuals with special needs and individuals impacted by the criminal justice system with storytelling in film. Growing up in the Bronx and becoming a special education teacher in the Bronx, seeing kids drop out of school was the norm. Dr. K founded Preschool to Prison LLC and is a film director of her new documentary, Preschool to Prison. She has served on the International Board of Directors and the Education Legislative Committee at ASCD, where she and her team has advocated to Congress and developed national educational policy points to address systemic barriers facing children, families, and educators. She is also a co-author for the new classroom instruction that works. I loved all the passion that Dr. K brought to this conversation. I learned a lot. I personally didn't know a whole lot about IEPs, learning a lot about that and learning how we can advocate for students with special needs, especially when we're going into the classroom, finding what works for them. She's just such an amazing individual, and the way she reimagines education was just such a beautiful thing to hear. So I'm so excited to share this conversation with you, so let's hop into it. And hello. Welcome to Conscious Pathways. I am joined by the fabulous Dr. K. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Brittany.
Yes. I'm so excited. I always am like talking about my guests, and like I'm always amazed when I get, guests on here who have just like a beautiful background of experience and just things that they've done. And I'm like, wow, you want to talk to me? That's cool.
I'm excited to share with you
Thank you
today.
so much. So tell me a little bit about how you got your start in education. Who or what inspired you to want to be in education?
Oh, okay. Well, I actually took a non-traditional route in education. I did an alternative pathway. That's what they have for people whose major was not originally education. And so my original major was journalism. And I actually was working in television and met someone who asked me to come help out working at a group home. That's how I actually ended up working with kids. I was transitioning between TV stations, and I said, oh, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not working in a group home. And so I was like, that's nothing to do with what I want to do in life. And my friend was like, I'm telling you, it'll just be temporary. We just need a lot of help. I think you would be really good at it. And I was like, all right, fine. And then I got there and I met these wonderful girls. And I was just like, oh my gosh, who could do this to these kids? And I just like fell in love with the work around really helping the children who were removed from their homes for various reasons, and just seeing that, oh my goodness, like kids should never have to go through this. And it was, I ended up staying longer than I planned to. And then I remember my supervisor coming to the group home one day and calling me to the office. And he actually told me, he said, I really think you would do the greater good working in public education than you would in nonprofit in group homes. He said, I know there's so much more you can do there. And I was like, oh, okay, I never thought about that. And so I actually became a para. And being a para, and at that point still had no education degree. I ended up getting a degree in sociology and psychology because I've always been fascinated with people and just understanding how people operate and why people do the things that they do. And so that was actually really helpful in my role of working with children. And through that, just always had somebody else coming to me saying, "Oh, now I think you should do this." And I was like, wow, when I think about my career pathway,
Hmm.
I'm like, I haven't really did much thinking for myself around what I wanted to do. It was really always someone else seeing it in me and for me
Mm.
and encouraging me to take a different pathway. And that's what I did. And that's honestly how I ended up in education.
Wow. I love that there were so many people like along your journey who saw that in you and said,
Mhm.
you know what, I see this, go for it. And you're like, I don't know about that.
Every role, even when I was a para, I was like, "Oh, I can keep doing this. I'm fine," and then I'll just go back to TV. Like I
Hmm.
really had that lens, and the assistant principal came to me one day, was like, "You need to get your teaching license. You need to be a special ed teacher." And I was like, "Why?" And then she's like, "Really? I think you'd be really great." And then I was like, "All right," and I did. And then from there, she said, "You will always have a job here."
Mm.
And I remember it had to be about 3 years later. I called her up, and she's like, "We do have an opening." And yeah. So I ended up working there, and she and the principal were the same people who actually pushed me to get my administrative license.
Mm.
I did, and then I ended up going back to school, getting a degree in leadership, and it's just always been that of other
Wow.
people seeing that for me. And so I'm really grateful because I've had amazing people put in my path
Mm.
who were great leaders, who
Mm.
also saw that in me and pushed me for that.
Yes, and that is such a beautiful thing that, unfortunately, not everyone gets to have along their educational journey, having someone there that's pushing you, that's seeing that light in you and saying, like, hey, there's so much more out here and you have the capacity to do all of these different things. So that's a really beautiful part of your story, and I love to hear that. Yes,
Hmm.
yes, of
Thank you.
course, of course. So when you were teaching, were you mostly kind of in older age groups? Were you kind of all over the age groups? Where were you?
Ugh. Well, when I was a para, I was all over the age groups.
Yeah.
But when I became a special education
Mhm.
teacher, I taught at the elementary level.
Okay.
So, yes. So from second grade to fifth grade was predominantly the grades that I
Mhm.
taught. They are just so cute. They
They
really
are.
were.
They are. I come from an early childhood education background, so I was mostly like pre-kindergarten teaching,
Mhm.
and I've done some work in K through 12 schools, but elementary was still always my favorite. They're so
Oh,
energetic.
yeah, I agree. And that you just have, I mean, when you think about the power that an elementary
Mm,
school teacher has, you are literally shaping their brains, shaping their experiences. Like you have so much
mm,
influence on the development of a child,
yes.
right? It's not just the academics of teaching them how to read and write and add and subtract.
Hmm.
Like you are literally shaping their life experience and helping them to make sense of the world
Yes.
at that early age. And a lot of that stays with them,
Yes.
right? And as you get older, you see a lot of things happen with people in their lifetime, and you see things that people can't let go of or certain behaviors that they have. A lot of that, when they trace back to it, goes back to around 5 or 6 years
Mm,
old. And we don't realize how that stays with people
yes.
even into their adulthood, right? And it just goes in the back of their schema and it just sits there, but it's always there.
Mm, it is. It is. I tell people I do trainings for early educators. I'm always telling them that since we work with children who are so young, like sometimes they're like 2, 3, maybe they're infants and toddlers, right? And so I'm like, a lot of the time they might not remember who you are specifically, right? And I've seen my kids
Mhm.
that I've had in my classes, and now they're off in elementary school and they're much older, and they may not remember me myself. And like it hurts a little bit because I'm like, I changed your diaper, dude. Like, come on now. But but they will remember the
Right.
impact that you made. They'll remember those interactions. They'll
Yes.
remember the things they learned. They remember the school really well. They remember their peers really well. And so the environment
Mhm.
that you're creating and the interactions you're creating, that lasts a lifetime, right? Again, they might not remember you specifically, but they'll remember the lifetime of impact on what you did in those times. And so it's really important as educators that we're remembering that.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yes, yes, yes. And so when you were teaching, you mentioned, in other interviews and things like that. So when you were teaching, in the Bronx and things, you kind of noticed there were some challenges that students were going through, some consistent challenges that they were going through. How did these
Mhm.
experiences kind of influence your perspective on education and specifically justice?
I noticed quite a few things. First of all, where I was
Mm-hmm.
teaching, the poverty rate was 200%. And that was the
Mm,
first time I saw 200% on paper. I didn't even know you could have a 200%,
yeah.
right? Like, because we're always taught everything is at 100%. And I was like,
Mm,
whoa, like, what is that? Like, that just took my mind in so many different directions. But also, even without seeing that information on paper, just what I
mm,
observed was startling in the sense of the rate of students that didn't have a stable
mm,
home. You know, the environment, a lot of where my students were coming from were just very troubled environments that impacted how they engaged with one another. It also impacted how they saw me. It impacted how they just were able to exist in the school community
mm,
and just not even knowing who they were because kids are
mm,
hungry. I kept food in my classroom. I was the rebel teacher, by the way. I remember one of the school leaders said to me that if they don't get to school on time, then they just don't eat. And I was like, okay. I just kept food in my, I just figured out a workaround.
mm,
I wasn't arguing or going back and forth, right? We get so frustrated over things we can actually control.
mm.
So while I couldn't control them coming into school on time, I can control that I'm still going to give kids food.
Yeah,
They're
I
hungry.
agree.
I know what it feels like to be hungry. You're not going to tell this baby they can't
Mm-hmm.
eat. Right. And so that's what we did. And so it's all those things. And you just saw how the child engaged differently when they had food.
Mm,
And so, and she didn't understand the impact of what it means when you restrict food from children, right? From people. And so that's a right. That's not a privilege. Food should not be used as a
no.
privilege. And that's how this leader was using food as a privilege of
Mm,
like, you're late, you don't get to eat.
that's
One has nothing to do with the other. And
mm,
it's elementary. They don't get themselves to
right.
school, right?
They don't control this.
And I'm like, what is wrong with
Yeah.
you? And so that, and then on top of that, seeing the high rate of referrals for students being
Mm,
referred for special education is really what had me like, hold up. Why is this kid being referred?
yeah.
And I just really started asking a lot of questions and challenging the things that I was seeing because it didn't
Mm,
match what I saw in the classroom, didn't match what was in the documentation, which was the IEP, the individualized education
mm,
plan. So I started questioning it. And it was one year in particular, well, even before that year I'm about to speak
mm,
about, but I started challenging. I started decertifying kids who didn't need it.
mm,
I was like, we're not doing it.
yeah.
And this was before I really even understood about the school to prison pipeline. I just saw that
Mm,
this is not accurate. This child probably needs maybe 90 minutes of reading instead of 60 minutes of reading,
yeah.
but this child doesn't need special education services. What?
Mm-hmm.
Because we've now used special education as a place. It has become a
Yes.
default for children who do not sit when I tell you to sit, for children
Mm,
who, oh, you're poor, you must need special education.
mm,
You're black and brown, you must need special education. When a lot of people, not even many teachers understand or educators even understand that special education is not a place.
yes.
Special education is a set of services that are rendered to children,
Mm,
right, to support them where they need extra
yeah.
support. And it is supposed to be temporary. But what
Yes.
we've done in this country is that we use special education as a default. We use it as a placement. We use it when a child doesn't sit. We use it if a child talks back. We use it if the
Mm,
child doesn't do homework. We use it if the child is reading slightly below grade level, right? We use it for so many other things other than what it should be used for, right? So now special education has become a place instead of a set of services.
yes.
So I used it within what the law said it is. It's a set of services. So I started decertifying. They don't need the service. Right. And so this is the power of like, do educators even know you can challenge this IEP and decertify students? So I would have conversations with parents and I started decertifying kids.
Yes.
Those who did not need it, why are we having them take services and resources that they don't need? It's not a place, right?
Exactly.
So then why are we giving them services they don't need? Instead, now I'm going to make sure this baby's in a co-teaching classroom or in a gen ed classroom because that's what they need. That's the service they need. I had one student in particular. I never forget the student. At the time when I was still teaching, this is when one of the classifications was still mental retardation. Now they have changed that word. It's no longer mental retardation, it's intellectual disability, right? So ID has replaced MR. And so the school psychologist had put MR on this child's IEP. And I was like, no, this does not match. Like I'm looking at the DSM-4, like I'm looking in all those books. I'm like, this does not match.
Yeah.
So I decided to dig through the beginning of when this was first done, his evaluation. And I looked, and this kid came to the country at 5, did not speak English. And she wrote that the student would not respond to her questions. And like, she had nothing else in there. And I'm just like, the kid is 5. Yeah. The kid is new to the country. The kid doesn't speak English, and you're a stranger. What did you expect from a 5-year-old? MR was placed on his IEP. I called his parents and I was like, I want to talk to you when you come pick him up today. And I told him what I found. And I was like, he does not need this. Your child is not mentally retarded. And this is how you challenge it. This is how you open it up. You ask for a new IEP. And, and I remember his parents were just like crying and wailing, was like, they just didn't understand. And coming to this country, they just trusted like, okay, if this is what the school system said it is, and this is what it is. And we went through that whole process. It went from MR to just learning disability.
There you go.
That's it. The child had a lisp. He needed speech and language. That's what the child needed, speech and language. Not a whole IEP that said mentally retarded. Right? Like, yeah.
And what's hard with that too is that, I have many friends who have, immigrated here and have, told me their experiences in education and how common that is. How often that they come to this country and maybe they don't speak English, there's that language barrier there, which makes sense, right? And then you go into school and you're put in special education classes. So not only are you separated from your peers and you're in this other classroom, you're not getting the actual thing that you need, right? You're being categorized as something else. And it's like, well, no, you just needed some speech and language, or you just needed, an educator who specializes in, second dual language, instruction, that might have just all you needed. And like you said, it's to provide services. It's not supposed to be forever. It's supposed to be temporary, right?
Right.
And so that just reminds me of all of those stories that I've just heard and how disheartening that is. That one, either children who need services, they fly under the radar somehow and they don't receive the services that they need, or there's children who are being disproportionately, put in these programs who, like you said, they might just need something else that's not actually being provided. So either way, the children are not getting what they need, and that is sad and upsetting.
Absolutely. Right. There's either an overrepresentation, right? Or there's an underrepresentation. So kids are either over-referred or under-referred for special education, which is dangerous either way. Right. So You don't set them up for success, so we see the
Mm-hmm.
impact, or you provide them services that they don't need, making them believe something is wrong with
Yep.
me, making me believe there's something wrong with my child, because
Mm-hmm.
this is then what happens. There's something wrong with my child, and then the doctor says, well, take this medication. Your child needs to take this medication.
Mm-hmm.
So now your child is being prescribed something for something that they don't even have,
Yeah.
or something that doesn't even require
Yeah.
medication. So now I'm taking medication for something that probably doesn't even exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's dangerous either way, whether there's an over identification or an under identification.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening either way. And children
Yep.
suffer. And there's irreparable harm that is caused not just to that child, but to that family, and not just to that family, but to society, to community,
Yep.
right? When you start thinking about the layers, a lot of people don't understand when they make these decisions. And then you do have some that understand when they make those
Mm-hmm.
decisions, what that harm is, that systemic harm. Right. And so where do we go from there? This is why I talk about
Mm-hmm.
retraining, right? Teacher prep programs. Every educator should have a special education training and distinction attached to their degree. That I
Yes.
just don't understand how everybody is not trained. Can you imagine if we said, well, only some doctors should know CPR and not other doctors?
No.
What? I mean, what do you mean everyone isn't trained on how to teach children with diverse learning
Yeah.
needs? Isn't that what an educator is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I mean, when you think about even if I'm in a general ed classroom,
Mm-hmm.
there are children in there with diverse
Yeah.
learning needs. I mean, neuroscience shows no two people learn the same,
Mm-hmm.
and that the way we all learn is very unique,
Mm-hmm.
likened to our fingerprints,
Yeah.
where no one has the same fingerprint.
Mm-hmm.
So think about, that's how we all learn, but yet this type of neuroscience and education is not embedded in teacher preparation programs and
Mm-hmm.
leadership preparation programs. We are woefully turning people out that are underprepared
Mm-hmm.
to lead and to teach.
Yep.
Right. And so we have people stepping into leadership roles who just don't understand the diverse learning of not just the students, but of their teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the teachers who are being pumped out into these schools who also are underprepared and understanding what those needs are. We don't take mental health as seriously as we should in this country, right? We have more and more people talking about it, thank
Yes.
goodness, but we still have places in this country that will actually prohibit social emotional
Yeah.
learning.
It's been politicized now.
To say that,
Mm-hmm.
yes, how have we politicized
I don't know.
people's mental well-being? Like, how have we politicized saying, no, children should not be well in schools?
Mm.
Like, because that's what social emotional learning is. We are understanding what it is that people are coming in with, what it is, what that the impact of experience look like,
Mm-hmm.
trauma, and then how do we still teach, how do we still do what we were hired to do, right, irrespective of the trauma that our children may come in school with. And I'll tell you, a lot of times the kids are getting trauma, right? The
Mm-hmm.
trauma doesn't, I don't kid, not every kid comes in with
Yep.
trauma, but we have kids that are, the trauma is experienced at school,
Yes.
right? So we need to, like, what are we doing with that information? What are we doing with that? But we're not doing enough around that.
Mm-hmm.
And in places that say we don't do SEL here,
Yeah.
those are the places that actually need it the most.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is reminding me of something that I'm actively learning about. So I'm learning a lot about special education, and what really connected with what you kind of just said was that this should be a part of our teacher preparation programs. So when I started teaching, I wasn't required to take a special education class or certificate,
Mhm.
like nothing like that. That wasn't a requirement. So when I was in my classrooms and I had, students who had, a diversity of needs, I had, students with autism in my classroom, students with sensory processing disorder in my classroom, and I felt so underprepared to meet the needs of those students. I just did not have the skills. I didn't have the knowledge, and I felt so bad. I would go home and like do some research, like,
Mhm.
okay, how can I help the student? What can I do? But you know, in education, we sometimes just like throw people out there, like, okay, go do the thing. and they're so underprepared for like the diverse needs of the way that our world is right now. Um, and so it's
Yes.
reminding me of this idea of like universal design for learning. And so I've been doing a lot of like research on that. And it's essentially this idea that comes from architecture, kind of like designing our public
Yeah.
spaces. And so
I love you.
me too. I love it. Ever since I learned about it, I'm like, we need this everywhere. But it's the idea of just
Hmm.
designing our spaces to work for
Yeah.
everybody, you know, and not just designing. And when it applies to education, not just designing our curriculum so that it works for, the neurotypical students, right? So we've designed our curriculum, it works
Hmm.
great for neurotypical students, but we know most people aren't neurotypical. Exactly what you said. No two brains are going to be the exact same. We process information differently. We process our sensory information differently. Like just the way that our brains are and our experiences and all those different things. Like it just makes our brains so different. And it's just harder, yes, to kind of try to teach for all these different things. But once you have the knowledge of it and once you do your work behind that and you're like, okay, now I know how I can diversify my curriculum to meet the needs of all of my students and not just a small subset of my students.
Right.
Hmm.
That.
Yes.
That. Right. And that's what every parent wants for their child when they send their child to school.
Yes.
They believe we are the certified
Hmm.
professionals who have the answers
Hmm.
to what their child needs. And many parents, unless they're educated themselves, don't realize how we don't have
Yeah.
a lot of the tools and the skills that we need to reach their child.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of this falls, especially when it comes to special education, special needs, and all these things. A lot of that does fall on the parents to be the advocate for their children. And a lot of the times, like they might specialize in very different things for work. They might have a lot of different knowledge in this one area, but when it comes to education, you know the, like I can't expect everyone to know the exact in and outs and how you advocate, who do you advocate for, what's in all these different things. And so like as an
Yeah.
additional job that parents now have to take on is not only am I a parent, not only do I have a job, not only do I need to keep a roof over our head, but now I also need to know these very specific in and outs of the special education system. And a lot of the
Which most times they're not even given
no.
that information. And I can't begin to tell you how many schools don't even know what the process is.
Mm,
They don't know what the process is themselves. And so they don't give parents that information. Parents don't know that they can get free advocate, for their advocate groups out there that will provide free support, that will show up with them to IEP
mm-hmm.
meetings. They should never be going
Yep.
alone. But who's their support? But do schools even give them that information?
Mm,
Do schools even know that that even exists? Right. And
yeah.
so, and they're all over the country, right? It just takes that parent who has
Yep.
time, right? And is savvy enough to say, well, let me look this up. When I talk to schools who have violated the rights of their students with special
Mm,
needs, they don't even realize a lot of times the IEP is a federal document. I'm like, do you realize this is a federal document?
mm,
This isn't just like a piece of paper
yeah.
that people just sat together in a room and just slapped together and said, "Oh, here you
Mm,
go." Like this is a federal like you can be sued. Do you realize you can be sued? And I'm like, if you're okay with being sued, then okay,
mm,
right? But it's that type of fire sometimes that has to be lit for them to realize, like, wait a minute, I'm like, first of all, people with special needs are also one of the protected groups in this country. So, I mean, there's so many things. And like, and they're a protected group for a
yeah.
reason because of exactly what's unfolding right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so this level of discrimination, alienation, isolation,
Mm,
seclusion, all of these things that happen to children with special needs and families,
yes.
right? It just like, how are we making sure that we are prioritizing our children with special needs?
Mm,
How are we making sure we find the resources that we need for them?
yeah.
And I've been in so many places that will tell teachers, don't write that service on the IEP. We don't have somebody to provide it, so the kid can't get it. Don't put it on there.
Wow.
And parents don't know that. And they just sign off on it.
Yeah.
Or the school would try to convince them, he doesn't need that anymore. So we're not putting it on there.
Mm. And that's
And this is why they need an advocate with them at those
yes.
meetings.
Yeah.
I always tell parents, you do not go to an IEP meeting by yourself.
Yeah. No. because it seems like it would be cut and dry. It's like, oh, it's just like a parent teacher conference. I'm just going to meet with the school and we're going to talk. No, like you said, it's a federal document. It's a protected class. You want to make sure that your students getting exactly what they need. No, nothing more, nothing less. Exactly what they need, all the services that they need,
Mm-hmm.
and that can is unfortunately very tricky, and it's unfortunate, and it goes into social justice in so many different ways. But then you have this idea of voice and choice. So who has the choice of what schools they can go to and whose voices are being heard, right? And so if you're low income, you're working 1, 2, 3, maybe a couple of jobs or something like that, you don't have the time to also be doing all of this like lawyer level research to make sure that you're advocating, right? And so oftentimes these children get kind of swept under the rug, and they're not getting that same advocacy. And it's not their fault, it's not their family's fault, right? It's the way the system is designed. Right? It's not
Right.
designed to be the most helpful that it could be for students. It's not designed to be culturally responsive. It's not designed to look at all
Exactly.
these different needs and levels of needs, right? It isn't. It's a service, and it's one of those great services that was built with the best intentions, but the way that the system is, it just ends up harming students and families more than it actually sometimes helps. Just a whole other thing. I can go on a tangent on that.
That's another
That's a
podcast
whole other
episode.
podcast episode. um, Speaking of, we can shift gears a little bit. So one thing that I was really interested that you also talk about is, you mentioned it earlier too, the school to prison pipeline, and of course where that intersects with early childhood, that preschool to prison pipeline. And I know we chatted about it a little bit before we started recording, but how I think people are starting to become more understanding what the school to prison pipeline is. I think it's becoming more in conversations. People are becoming a little bit more aware of it, how it happens, why it happens. Um,
Hmm.
but it's that preschool portion of it, like how it starts really early. I think that's a fairly
Oh,
like new, it's not new, but it's a newer conversation that people are starting to also become aware of. Um,
yes.
yes. So if you want to talk a little bit about those zero tolerance
You know,
policies or anything like that just, especially when it comes to preschool, just yes.
yeah, I think a lot of times
Mhm.
adults in education settings often forget that children are children
Yes.
and that most of the behaviors that they
Mhm.
witness are developmentally appropriate.
Yes.
They might be annoyed by the
Mm-hmm.
behavior, and that's what they respond to is their feeling about the
Mm-hmm.
behavior,
Yes.
not what is developmentally appropriate and inappropriate. And most educators don't even have the training around what is developmentally appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And so they end up responding to their feeling about the behavior that the child
Yeah.
displayed. That's where we have so many disparities, because when you think about in society, the historically the message that has been told, right, when you look at what some of these elected officials have said over the past of calling us predators,
Mm-hmm.
right, black people predators, and that we're violent and all these things that they have
Yes.
associated with us, these mindsets are now sitting in, right, these stereotypes are sitting in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
We don't wake up every day thinking about it, but we don't even realize how we apply that in our setting as
Yep.
educators, irrespective of your ethnicity, irrespective of race, however you want to call, right? It doesn't matter if I'm white, if I'm black, if I'm Latin, if I'm Asian.
Mm-hmm.
We all have that perception, right? It's not just white people think about this about black and brown children. Black and brown educators think this of black and brown children as
Yep.
well, right? And those mindsets now play out in how we handle the behavior. Because we also, and I hear this all the time from educators of when I went to school, well, you're not in school anymore.
Yes.
This is a different time.
Mm-hmm.
These are the kids you have now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you look at right now, about 1.5 million students in this country are
Mm-hmm.
preschoolers. 7% of that have disabilities, right? And have received 2.5 times more suspensions than the total preschool population. How does that make sense? I don't understand that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you think about how, oops, sorry. You think about how Now that shapes that child's experience. So when you say pre-K, tell me what image do you get in your mind when you hear pre-K? Right? Most people are getting an image of this little cute child running around, playing, happy, right? Having a good time. 3 years old. And in some cases, they're coming in at 2.9 years old. Right? So can you imagine 2.9 years old, your child is being suspended from school? They had an article that just dropped last week where a mother shared the story of her child being suspended the first day of school in kindergarten.
First day? We're all just learning.
First day of school. First day. I said, that's when we're just learning each other's names. We're singing happy songs, right? My name is suspended. And the reason he was suspended, the child was frightened. Child has a disability. Child has autism. The child was frightened, ran into the bathroom and locked the bathroom door. And there was another kid in the bathroom. So they suspended her child because his interaction was inappropriate. What he did was inappropriate, locking himself in the bathroom with another child.
That is a conversation. That's not a suspension worthy. That's conversation. We're learning boundaries. And again, he's frightened. He doesn't know you.
Frightened.
He just met you.
And the child has autism.
He has autism. That's a lot of shifts and change for anybody.
That's a lot happening.
But then you add on, a disability that also is really hard with change. So that's a lot happening right there. That's a conversation with the parent. That's a conversation with the child. That's a conversation of, what do we do when we feel scared? What do we do when we need space? What do we, those are all conversations that we can start to have, okay, I understand. Let's go there. That is not suspension worthy behavior.
Exactly. And one of the things I say to educators is, what's the point of school? If kids can't come here and get it wrong, what is the point of school?
Yeah.
I thought the point of school was to learn. I thought the point of school was to make mistakes, right? And we're not talking about crime. I'm not talking about egregious, heinous behaviors. I'm talking about kids crying. Yeah. This boy with autism who ran into the bathroom and locked the door at 5. This is what we're putting kids out of school for. But again, there's no training and understanding of what social emotional learning is, what is considered developmentally appropriate, right? And so you think about what is the impact on children. This child is traumatized. Her son doesn't want to go to school. And then they interviewed the attorney who said, oh, well, we made improvements here because before, they would just tie kids up, restrain them, literally tie them to a chair and left them there to urinate and defecate on themselves. And here this attorney is saying, we've made progress here.
Yeah, that is progress.
Yeah, that's what's happening in first world country. This is supposed to be a first world country, right? And that's what's happening in this country.
We're not physically abusing them, so we've made improvements. It's that's a low bar, friend. The bar.
I can't begin to tell you how low the bar is across this country, how low the bar is in many places. I get so excited when I go to places that are like, oh no, we have high expectations and we provide the support so that the child can meet the high expectations. Because we could set high expectations all day long, because that's also as bad as setting low expectations, is having high expectations with no support. And then you blame the kid and you say, see, we have high expectations. Of course you can, but you never provided the support. And then you say that I can't. Then you say that I'm unable. Right? When you set your expectations so high without the appropriate support, then you blame me and you say, oh, well, something must be wrong with you because you can't meet the expectation we have for you, but you never provided me the support.
Exactly.
And one of the things I always say to educators when I'm working with high school, I say, high school is always say, well, the kids should have learned this in middle school. Then I work with middle school and they say, oh, kids should have learned this in elementary. I work in elementary, go, oh, parents should be teaching this at home. I talk to parents, they're like, well, I thought the kids were learning it in
Yeah.
school. I said, well, then who's teaching
Yeah.
it? Who's doing any of the teaching? Everybody believes it's someone else's job. So they don't do it
Mm-hmm.
because it's not my job, that's your job.
Mm-hmm.
It's the small stuff that if we all did our part and work together to support one another, we can truly reimagine school as a joyful place. School is no longer a joyful place, not just for kids, but for the educators.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Right? And so if we don't have happy, healthy, whole adults standing in front of children, what do you think the impact is going to be on that child's
Mm-hmm.
experience? Think about that. Now, what's the impact on that community,
Mm-hmm.
on that family, on society if we don't have happy, healthy, whole adults
Mm-hmm.
standing in front of children giving it their all? Because if I'm unhappy, if I am lacking something significant
Mm-hmm.
where I cannot be fully present, how effective do you think my teaching is?
Yep. Yep.
And there's grave impact on kids. Right? And so when we start suspending children for minor infractions because this child didn't sit down, this child is running around.
Mm-hmm.
At 2 and 3 years old, children do bite.
Yeah.
And I know that's also a major issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? That people who work in preschool would tell you about that they deal with and they don't want to deal with it. And I'm not saying you should have to,
Doesn't
right?
feel great. I'm gonna say it doesn't feel great.
Doesn't feel great, right? No one wants to
No one
be
wants
bit.
that.
And I know that's a lot of the
Yeah.
behavior, but we need the support from trained professionals
Yes.
to support on how do we prevent this from
Mm-hmm.
happening? What does this mean when a child resorts to biting you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the antecedent that's leading to
Yeah.
this type of behavior?
What's the communication?
Right? There's so many, right. And then on top of it, we're not paying them a high
Oh.
enough wage, right? And so you start adding that on top of
Mm-hmm.
it. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm making $12 an hour to get bit all day long,
Yeah.
and I don't have the appropriate training
Yeah.
or the resources
Mm-hmm.
or the personnel to support
Mm-hmm.
me. I don't have to tolerate this. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't set the adults up for success, and we're definitely not setting the child up for success. And when children are suspended, they are 10 times more likely to drop out of school
Mm-hmm.
and be incarcerated.
Because we're setting them up for failure, essentially, right? What we're doing when we do suspension and expulsion, especially at that young age, but at any stage in their life, right? When we're basically removing them from the school community, right? We're saying, you're not welcome here. And then also, what is that communicating to the other students in the classroom, right? If we're constantly subjecting our Black and Brown students to suspension and expulsion, constantly subjecting our students with special needs to suspension and expulsion, right? Not only are you communicating something to those students that you are actively harming, you're communicating that same thing to their families, you're communicating that same thing to the other students in that classroom. So what information are they going to be gathering there, right? I always say, when it comes to bias and prejudice and stereotypes, very rarely are these things explicitly stated to us, especially when it comes in young children. Very rarely are we talking to these young children and saying, oh yeah, you see Jamal over there? Jamal is bad. Jamal is aggressive. Jamal is this. Jamal is that. Very rarely are we speaking those exact words to children, but we're speaking volumes through our actions. We're speaking volumes through the resources we're
Yes.
bringing into the classroom. We're speaking volumes by what teachers we're bringing into the classroom, what community, like how is the
Mhm.
community being involved in our classroom, right? So they're learning so much just by what's around them, just by the behaviors that we're showing them,
Yeah,
the words that we're using, the books that we have in the classroom, the pictures in the walls, right? We're communicating so much because invisibility is just as loud as that visibility too.
absolutely. And what you
Yes.
communicate, right? That the form of dehumanizing,
Mm-hmm.
and you start controlling the mind, you don't have to worry about the
Yep.
behavior. So if I control the mind and make you believe you're inferior, you're less than, you're
Mm-hmm.
not human, you're unworthy, you
Mm-hmm.
don't belong here, you're
Yeah.
beneath, which is all the messaging that has been done to Black
Yeah.
people, brown people, immigrants, females, right? Like when you think about all of that, And the list goes on,
Mm-hmm.
right? I just named just a few.
Mm-hmm.
But that has been done to so many different groups of people in this
Yes.
country forever.
Yes.
And so I'm mentally conditioning you to believe that you can't even attain any of that
Mm.
stuff.
And it becomes
And once I do
internalized.
that, I'm good.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Mm-hmm.
internalized. And so this is why I talk about dismantling the preschool to prison pipeline,
Yes.
really is dismantling our education system,
Mm-hmm.
because our education system plays a significant role,
Yep.
probably, in fact, it's the most influential role in shaping our thoughts and our minds
Mm.
and our beliefs about ourselves and about other groups of
Yep.
people, because our history books aren't even
No.
accurate.
And that's a whole other podcast in itself.
We don't want it to be. Let's be
Yeah.
clear. There are people in this country who
Mm-mm.
don't want it to be accurate.
No.
Because if you learn about you, we already know where that goes.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, you're empowered. You know the truth? We don't want you
Yep.
empowered. That's why certain places don't want SEL.
Yep.
That's why you have places that are banning and burning books and doesn't want critical race theory, and they don't want, right,
Yeah.
they don't want the truth.
Yeah. And that's so hard and so rough because we know what happens when people are empowered with the truth and they're empowered with the resources, they're empowered with the opportunities. Like we know what happens, especially when there's social emotional learning, the power in that, right? And so this is all, it's all very intentional, right? This isn't by accident, it's by design, right? And it makes it incredibly difficult to do the work that gets us as in a country and as a society to move forward on things. Um, and it's just, it makes it harder. But on that topic, how do you reimagine education?
This is a great way to end. Um, uh, I really reimagine education as a joyful place
Yes.
where children and the adults standing in front of them actually have joy.
Mm,
Joy looks like no barriers to learning.
mm,
Joy looks like children having exploratory
mm,
experiences. Joy looks like the world and the classroom are merged.
mm.
There's no wall that separates the world and the classroom, because the classroom is the world and the world is the
Yes.
classroom, right? And children are free to explore that. I literally look at children developing their own pathway in
Mm,
learning, picking what they want to learn, identifying what that looks like, co-creating and co-constructing with teachers.
mm,
Teachers also teaching within the things that they love, what they know, what they understand, like really getting developed, trained, coached, supported in those areas and honing their craft in those areas, right? Families are part of that process. Families are choosing alongside families. Schools are a place and a resource for the community.
mm.
It's not just a building that you send your child to, it's a resource center for the community,
Yes.
right? Where families are getting the support that they need. We have adequate human resources in schools. Children are free thinkers in schools. Like all of their talents, all of their ideas, all of that is harnessed
Mm,
and cultivated. It's not 9 to 9:50 I have to teach ELA. 9:50 to
mm-hmm.
10:30 I have to teach math. 10:30 to 11:10 you go to
Mm-hmm.
science. No. Right? Like, but how do we create a day that's filled with fun? School should be a place where it's fun. Children should be laughing, adults should be
Yes.
laughing, right? There's so much that can be done. And the areas where people need development and support, we have professionals that come in, we have organizations that are partnering with schools and providing the rich arts for our kids.
Mm,
I can't begin to tell you how the arts have saved many lives,
yes.
literally,
Yes.
literally saved their lives.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the first thing we take out of schools, is the lifesaver.
Yeah.
right? I can go on about what I reimagine schools of where we teach discipline and not administer punishment.
Yes.
That's what our schools should look like,
Yeah.
where our children understand the impact of their actions and behaviors and their teachable moments, and we teach discipline, but we come with a place from a place of love,
Mm,
not a place of punishment.
yes. I felt that. I felt that in my soul. That made my whole
Mhm.
soul just feel very happy, because I've taught in schools like that, and I know the amazing, beautiful joy that can come from that, where the teachers love being there, the students love being
Yes.
there, the families are engaged, the families are
Yes.
happy, and I
Yep.
want that for every student to experience
Yes,
that.
I
So
agree.
it's like I've seen it, I felt it,
Yep.
I know it exists, it's out
It
there.
right. I've seen it too.
Yes.
And it's beautiful. I've been in places where I don't want to
Yeah.
leave. Where I say, you know what? I'm gonna stop doing what I'm doing. I'm coming here because you just
Mm-hmm.
feel the joy the minute you walk in the
Yeah.
door. And I'm like, this could be replicated.
Yeah.
We can do
Yeah.
this.
And the learning is so
But it
deep.
starts,
The learning is so deep.
yes, but it also starts with the mindset of the adults
Yes.
in that
It sure
building.
does.
Do we even believe
Mm-hmm.
it's possible? Do we believe every single child in
Mm.
here is a star?
Yeah.
Do we even believe that? Because if every adult doesn't even believe that, then we'll continue to see the behaviors that we see.
100%.
But in those places that you and I have seen the
Mm-hmm.
success and we have seen the love and we've seen the care that each adult is because every adult in that building
Mm-hmm.
believes that every child is a star.
Yes.
Every adult in that building believes in the power of their teaching.
Yes. Absolutely.
And if we could do those two things, even if you didn't get all the funding, those schools still move forward and said, okay, we didn't get this. What can we do in lieu of that?
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I
Yes.
said, I felt that in my soul. It felt good. We've seen it happen. We know it's out there. It does start with the
Mhm.
adults in the classroom. It starts with us. It starts with the leadership. How are you cultivating a space where, educators can feel and do this, right? It starts with so much, but it's
Mhm.
possible and it's out there. Um,
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Dr. K, for joining me and just sharing your light and all
Thank
this beautiful
you.
information. And hopefully, you can come back on and we could talk even more about some of these topics we didn't have time to talk about. There's just so many good,
Thank you for
beautiful
having
things.
me. Yes.
Where can my audience find you? Are you working on anything?
Oh yes, they can find me. Yes, please. Social media is always like the best place because our team keeps our social media page up to
Mhm.
date with if we have screenings, panels, all that good
Yeah.
stuff. So please, on Instagram, you can follow us at preschool to prison doc. And the word TO is spelled out. Preschool to prison
Gotcha.
doc. That's where you can find us on IG. Facebook, it's Preschool to Prison Documentary Project.
Mm.
That is where you can find us on Facebook as well. And then we've had people who want to go to our website. Our website is preschool to prison documentary. That's all one word,
Mhm.
right? Preschool to prison documentary.com. And, I also, one of the things that I really love when schools reach out and on organizations as well, nonprofits reach out about our dismantling the pipeline workshop. So
Mm.
we do have a dismantling the pipeline workshop series. Is for me, it's not about just screen the documentary somewhere and that's it, or
Mm.
just tell people go do this, but sitting side by side with people and showing them how we can
Yes.
start to dismantle the pipeline within what's within our locus of control.
Hmm.
So you can visit preschool 2, as in the number 2, prison.com.
Perfect.
So, and that's where you will see our consultancy and our coaching services provided there. So definitely pay us a visit. You'll find us all over. And once you go there too, you can subscribe to our YouTube page as well. And that's where we drop our videos and So much appreciation, Brittany. Thank you for having me. I look forward to connecting with other folks as
Yes,
well.
absolutely. And I'll link all of those things in our show notes. So if you want to check out anything Dr. K is working on, or just want to look at beautiful social media, check out the documentary. I'll link that all there. Thank you again, Dr. K, so much for joining me. It was a pleasure speaking with
Thank
you.
you.
And I look forward to more things
You
you do
too.
in the future.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much for tuning in to Conscious Pathways. Don't forget to like, follow, and share Conscious Pathways wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to leave a rating or review. It really does help the podcast to grow and find more listeners just like you. You can check out Conscious Pathways on YouTube, where I put the video version of this podcast. So if you're interested in seeing that, it will be there as well. If you're interested in anything else I do, so if you like hearing me talk about social justice and things, you can go to my website at consciouspathways.org and learn about some trainings that I do. So if you want me to come speak to your students or speak to your teachers, speak at a conference, all that information is there. And until next time, don't forget to navigate your conscious journey with courage and kindness. And I'll see you then for more transformative conversations in education. Bye.